Okay, good morning. Today's daf is Sanhedrin daf Samach Tes. We begin by thanking our sponsors. We thank our annual Talmud Torah sponsors of the year 5785, the Tilson Mishpacha of Eretz Yisrael, as a zechus for besuros tovos for all of Am Yisroel, all of Klal Yisrael. We also thank our Daf Yomi sponsor for this morning, Mel and Karen Rom, leilui nishmas Mel's father, Mordechai ben Yitzchak. Mordechai ben Yitzchak should have an Aryeh Gan Eden, and the family should have a nechama. We are going to begin in Daf Samach Ches Amud Beis, and we begin with the 4 lines up from the bottom, Upliga de Rabba. Yesterday we mentioned the Gemara quotes Rav Richter, who tells us that there's another exception to the halachas of besuros umoreh. That is, that the besuros umoreh cannot be a father. Just to quickly quote him, he says, Amar Rav Richter, Katan shaholid ein beno nasa, Katan shaholid ein beno nasa ben besuros umoreh. Rister's halacha is that if a katan gives birth, his child is automatically going to get a lifetime exemption from the halachas of besuros umoreh. Why? Because it says in the pasuk, Kiyeh leish ben. The son has to be born to an ish. If the father of this ben is not an ish, then he's automatically going to be exempt from the halachas of besuros umoreh. Now the Gemara is going to spend the entire Amud today discussing whether or not a child can have a child. That's really the discussion of today's Gemara. The Gemara starts as follows. Upliga de Rav Richter, who is telling us that the pasuk is going to exclude the child of a child. He must have been of the opinion that a child can have a child. Upliga de Rav, that argues with Rabbi. Why? Rabbi says the following: Katan eina molid. A child cannot give birth. Shneimar, for it says in the pasuk, Im ein leish goel. This is talking about the halacha of Gezel Ager. There's a halach if a person steals something and he is approached by the victim of the theft and the person denies it. He says, it's not true, I never stole it. And he takes an oath, he takes a shvur that he didn't steal it, and then it turns out that he lied. He comes back and he admits that he lied. The halacha is that he has to pay the person back a karen, the principal in a chomash, an additional fifth, and he has to bring a carbon. Now the pasuk says, Im ein leish goel, if this person he has already passed away, and he does not have anybody who is going to be an heir of his estate, the halacha is, then the payment goes to the Kohen. The Gemara says, hold on a second, is it possible? Is there a person who doesn't have any relatives? Everybody's got some relative. Even if you don't have that many relatives, you can go back generation to generation to generation to generation and find somebody who you're related to. So how can the pasuk say that there's a person who does not have a goel? It's talking about a person who steals from a convert, and a convert halachically is not going to have any family unless he gets married and builds his own family. So now, the pasuk teaches us, Ish, it says very clearly in the pasuk that im ein lo ish goel, if the ish does not have anybody as a redeemer. Then the pasuk says, Ish at the tzarach lachzor alav. If the person who you stole from was an ish, you have to start reviewing im yesh goel, and if he has people who are relatives who could pick up the payment for him. V'im lav, or if not. However, katan, if the person who was stolen from is a katan, is a child, I ata tzarach lachzor alav, you do not have to start looking to see if the child has any relatives. Why? Because if the child is a convert, biyadua she'ein lo goelin, it's obvious he doesn't have any family members. Why? Because a child cannot father another child. Therefore, it's impossible to assume that this child convert has any relatives. Therefore, don't bother looking for them. So clearly, we see that Rabbi is of the opinion that a child cannot father another child, which is clearly it's in stark contrast to Rav Richter, because Rav Richter says there's a whole pasuk to teach you that if a child has a child, that child is going to be exempt from the entire concept of besuros umoreh. Well, if the whole thing is impossible, you don't need a pasuk in the Torah to tell you that. Eis v'Abaya. Abaya asks the following question. Ish, it says in the pasuk, This is the machlokes between Rashi and other Rishonim what this is talking about. We'll go with Rashi. Rashi tells us this is talking about a person who has an affair with a shivcha charufa. Shivcha charufa is a shivcha who is considered to be halfway free and halfway still a maidservant because she is married to an Eved Ivri. If a person has an affair with her, the halacha is that person gets malchus but does not get misa. The pasuk says, "Ish, ainli ela ish." I only know this halach is true if we're talking about an ish. Ben tes shanim v'yomechet sheroy lebia minayin. How do I know that a 9-year-old child, 9 years old, and 1 day, who's technically able to engage in a bia, how do I know that this person is going to be included in this parsha? Talmud Lomar, it says v'ish. The additional vav in the word says v'ish. That includes even a 9-year-old child. Now, as we see clearly, that a 9-year-old child is possible to be included in the concept of bia. And if he's included in the concept of bia, that means that he has the physical ability to be able to perform a bia. He's able to perform the bia physically, and also to be able to be motzi shechva zera. He could secrete shechva zera, because if he can't, that would be a fundamental flaw in the bia. So if you're saying that a 9-year-old child in 1 day can produce the zera, then obviously what should happen? He should be able to father a child. The Gemara says, Yesh lo ve'enu moled. Yes, he can actually physically perform the bia, but it's not going to be strong enough to be able to produce a child. What is this like? Kitivush lo hevi shlish dami. This is similar to grain that only grew 1/3, that did not grow 1/3. Rashi tells us if you try to plant that, it's not going to grow. So the same thing is true. You could have a seed, you can have a kernel, you could try to plant it, and it won't grow. The same thing is true when it comes to this child. He will be able to perform the bia, but the action of the bia is not going to be strong enough to actually produce a child. Okay, so it's possible that Rabbi is still correct that a child cannot give birth. The Yitzchak, they learned another allusion to this idea, which is v'chiyazid ish. The pasuk says v'chiyazid ish. The pasuk is talking about a person who intentionally ambushes somebody and kills him. The pasuk says v'chiyazid ish harei lahargai ba'arma mi'imiz v'chitikichen lamas. So there's kind of a play on words over here that the Yitzchak is going with. They say v'chiyazid ish. Ish, if the person's an adult, then mezid umazriya. He's able to cook. Cook is the physical bodily production of the zera, umazriya, and he can actually produce the semen. However, ein katan mezid umazriya. A katan, while yes, he might be able to produce it, and that would be the concept that yes, he could be mazid, he can cook it within his body could produce it. However, he cannot produce it and be mazriya and actually be strong enough to actually conceive a child as a result of that. Amar le Rav Mordechai Ravashi. Mordechai said to Ravashi, "My mashma dahai mezid lashon to bishulihu." Where did you find that this word mezid actually means to cook? Mezid seems to be a person does something intentional. Where do you see the word mezid means to cook? He responded to him, he said, the Chsivit says clearly in the pasuk, Vayazed Yaakov Nazid. Yaakov was cooking up this lentil soup, and it was referred to as Vayazed. So yes, the pasuk actually uses the word Vayazed to mean he cooked. But the Gemara goes on and says, and asks a question on this concept. Tana Be'er Yishmael, the Be'er Yishmael taught as follows. Then Velo Av. Again, when it comes to besuros umoreh, the only thing the kid could be is exclusively a ben, a son. He cannot be a father. Again, we have a gezeres hakasa to tell us that a child, a besuros umoreh must be a ben exclusively and not a father. Now, hold on a second. Heichidami. How is it possible that a besuros umoreh can even be a father? Remember our Mishnah taught us that the entire period of besuros umoreh is that period of time between when he starts to grow the 2 hairs until it completely grows in. So if you're telling me that she became pregnant after he grew 2 hairs, and she gave birth before all those hairs grew in, hold on a second, is there enough time for all that to happen, that she become pregnant and give birth so fast? The amount of time that there is for a besuros umoreh, there's only going to be 3 months. Why? Because it takes 3 months from the initial phase of those hairs growing until they fully grow in. Now it's impossible for a woman to give birth in 3 months. So how could it be that this child is going to actually be able to be a father, and that he'll have to be excluded from that. El alav, what must we be talking about? The aber mikami d'laisish saris. This woman became pregnant before the child brought shtei saris, while he was still a child. Va'olid, when did she give birth? Mikami d'leikiv zaken, before the hairs completely grew in. Now his parents bring him to Beis Din and say, our son's out of control. He was zolo, v'sove. They bring him to Beis Din. The Beis Din goes through the whole process. They say, hold on a second. He's a father. He's excluded because it's only relevant to someone who is a child. That's the case. But what do you see? Shma mina, katan molid. We must learn from here, we can infer from here that katan can indeed give birth to a child. Gemara says, no, incorrect. Lo la'olam, di'i aber bas daishish cyrus. What we're talking about is that the woman became pregnant from this young boy after he brought the shtei saris. So he's a gadol. He's already a gadol. He's halachically a gadol. He has 2 hairs. Now, va'olid, when did she give birth? Like a normal person, she gave birth, basar dakav zaken, many months after all those hairs completely grew in. Udika kashi, if you're going to have the question of Chris Badai teaches us that the entire period is 3 months. No, you misunderstood this, because Kiyas Rav Dimi Amar, when Rav Dimi came and told us that Amri b'marava, they told him Arava ben velo haroy lekroso av. What he meant to say was he has to be a ben, but he can't be called a father. When is someone called a father? He's called a father as soon as the person who is pregnant is noticeably pregnant. People see a woman who's pregnant and they say, oh, who's the father of this child? As we learned in Ksubis, there's the concept of mativo shel uber zeh. Where did this child come from? Now, once they say, oh, it came from this person, say, oh, he fathered the child. So he's called the father even before the child is actually born. So yes, the time of the pregnancy takes place, the conception takes place after he grows 2 hairs. Now, when is a woman noticeably pregnant? There was no pregnancy test that she could have just picked up in the dollar store then. So what happened? She had to actually be noticeably pregnant. That will happen within those 3 months. Once that happens within those 3 months, because in 3 months, that's called hukar ubra. They'll say, hold on a second. Whose child is this? Oh, it's that person, that boy, that Ben Sarah Mora, that guy. Oh, he's not a Ben anymore. He's a father. You father the child and be excluded. Okay, so in other words, it's going to work. It's going to work, and it's possible that she became pregnant from him once he was already a halachic adult. He's already past his bar mitzvah. Gufa, Amro Kurspadai, Amro Shapsi, Kol Yamosh, Ben Sora Mora, Eini Ela Gimel Chadashim. All the days of a Ben Sora Mora are only 3 months, Bilvad. V'hanan Tanan, we learned in our Mishnah, Misha Yavish Shtei Saras Vach Yaakov Hazaken. We didn't learn that this is a 3-month period. We learned the period of time is the amount of time it takes for him to fill in those hairs. Gemara says it's not a contradiction. But you know why? Because we give him the best of both deals. Hikif zaken afgad lo malu gimel chadashim. If all the hairs grew in within 2 months, then the halacha is he's already exempt. However, malu gimel chadashim afgad lo hikif. If he was very slow, but those 3 months passed, he's also going to be exempt. In other words, he gets to hold on to the rope from both sides, and he gets both kulas. Yosef Rav Yaakov and Arpakad Kamed Ravina. Rabbi Yaakov from Nahar Pakad sat in front of Ravina. V'Yosef v'Kamar, he said the following, Mishmei Rav Huna Brei Yeshua. He said the following in the name of Rav Huna Brei Yeshua. Shmami Namer Midrav Chris Badai. We learn from Chris Badai. Amar Rav Shapsai, that Yeledes L'Shiva, if a woman gives birth in her 7th month, Ein Ubra Nikar L'Shlish Yemea. We don't have enough time to get into this, but the Gemara assumes that there are 2 possible types of pregnancies. One pregnancy is a 9-month pregnancy, and another pregnancy is a 7-month pregnancy. And it's not that when a woman gives birth in her 7th month that she's giving birth to a preemie. Rather, there's a type of pregnancy that finishes in 7 months. Whether or not this is consistent with modern day science is above my pay grade, but that's what the Gemara is going to be discussing over here. Now, if that's the case, if there's a woman who can complete her pregnancy in 7 months, how would you divide those trimesters? When will those trimesters happen? So typically it's month 3, 6, and 9. But in this case, she's giving birth after 7 months. So when is her uber going to be recognizable? When will we be able to tell that she's pregnant? It must be, he says, the ein uber nikr lishlish. You're not going to notice her pregnancy when it's only a third, which is going to be 2 months and a third of a month. 2 months and a little bit over a week. If you'll tell me that she's already noticeably pregnant after a shlish, after a third of the way there, shlish yameh, lamali gimel. Why do we have to wait 3 months? But betrei v'tilsa sagi with 2 months and a third, that should be enough. In other words, that should be enough because that's a third of the way of her pregnancy. And it's noticeable. In other words, he gets called in as a potential besuros mora. You look at this woman. If she's not pregnant, so you say, okay, you're eligible. If she is pregnant, then he won't be eligible. But for her, it's going to be a much earlier time. The fact that we don't do that means it's not noticeable. Amalei, he said, no. Yes, she will become noticeably pregnant a third of the way through, which is 2 months and a third of a month. However, zil basaruba, we always go after the majority. And most women do not give birth after 7 months. Hold on a second. You're about to kill this besuros mora because you're assuming that his, not wife, but this woman is going to be, and potentially she can't be a wife, can't be married. The bottom line is that because you're assuming that she's not pregnant, but do we actually go after the majority to kill somebody? Remember, we're putting someone to death over here. The Gemara says, and TORAH Amra, and Torah teaches us that we saw this before, that one of the jobs of an adjudicating Beis Din is to try to save the potential convict in this case. Beis Din's job is always to find a way to save him from Misa. And now you're saying, go after the majority to put the guy to death. That's not how it works. Adrua kamed Ravina, and they came back to Ravina. The number lay, yes, we did in the Fashas law Zina Basaruba. Do we not go after the majority? I'll prove to you that we do. So it says in the Mishnah, one person tells us. He was testifying in a capital case, in a murder case, and he says it happened on the 2nd day of the month. The other one says it took place on the 3rd day of the month. We do not disqualify their edus just by virtue of the fact that they have contradicting months of the days of the month. Why? This guy got the memo that the previous month was extended. The other person does not know that it was extended. So therefore, they're both referring to the same incident that happened exactly at the same time, but their calendars had different dates on it because one of them got the memo that there was an extra day in the previous month and the other one did not. Now, if you're going to tell me that it comes to capital cases, we do not go after the majority. Let's just say we don't go after the majority. And what will we say? They are just simply being makrish each other. Elalav. In other words, they're contradicting each other. We should toss out their edus. Elalav. Mishum darmina zilbasaruba. We must say we go after the majority. And what does that mean? Rubeninchi avdi dito bibura diyarcha. Not everyone had an app on their phone that gave them the Hebrew date. And therefore, some people, it was very common that you went around town and you asked people, what date is it? One guy said, it is the 2nd of the month. Another guy said, it's the 3rd of the month. And eventually, sometime during the month, people figured it out. But it was very common for people to make this mistake, and the majority of people would make that mistake, and that would be fine, and therefore you could still accept the edus. You see clearly, you go after a rov. Amar Rabbi Yirmi b'difti afmanan mitnina. We also learn a girl who is, we learned this previously, a couple of weeks ago, about 2 weeks ago, we learned this Gemara, which says, a girl who is 3 years old in one day, we're here qualifying that any time she is intimate with somebody, she has bia, it is a full-fledged halachic bia. She can be married with the bia, if a levirate marriage takes place, then she is officially married to him. If she's married and someone is intimate with her, then the halacha is and if somebody is going to be boil her while she's in nida, then the tumah, as we explained last time, has a very strict level of tumah, which is mishkav tachtin ke'elyon. Even if you don't actually touch it, the person actually becomes tamei, and he can be tamei other things. Nissus the kohen, if this woman gets married to a kohen, ochelas b'shuma, she's allowed to eat truma. This is the relevant line over here. If any one of the disqualified people are intimate with her, pasla minat kahuna, she becomes disqualified from kahuna. Now, if any of the Aryeh is intimate with her, then halach is mumsin aleh, they will be put to death for being intimate with her. If he patur, she's obviously patur because she's a child, but if any one of the Aryeh in the Torah is going to be intimate with her, they are going to be chayiv misa. Why? Because they had a full-fledged bia with one of the Aryeh. The Gemara asks the question, V'yamai, why is it true? Ema islandess. Why don't we just say that maybe she is someone who's an islandess, she can't give birth? And V'adaita dahachi lo kaddish, the person who married her never wanted to marry a person who's not going to be able to have children. Elolav, what must we be saying? You say, this person went ahead, was intimate with an Eish, with this woman, or with one of the Aryehs, and why would you assume that she's an islandess? She's not going to be an islandess. She'll be like everybody else, or the majority of other people should be able to have children. And does and therefore you put the guy to death. So now you see clearly, you're putting a guy to death for being intimate with one of the Aryehs. Why? Because she's married. Hold on a second. She's married. Maybe the marriage will fall apart because she'll be an islandess. Nah, says the Gemara, we don't assume a woman's going to be an islandess. Most women are not an islandess. Therefore, says Beis Din, put the guy to death. Clearly, you're putting a guy to death because of the concept of rov, of the majority. Gemara says, "My chayev aleh de katani." No, you made a mistake. Doesn't mean it's chayev misa. De katani carbon. The person has to bring a carbon and not misa. Hold on. The Gemara says, "Mumsina yada katani." You didn't read it carefully enough. It said, "Mumsin al yada." You'll put the guy to death. The Gemara says, "Nah, that wasn't referring to all the Aryehs. That was referring to the ba'ala aviyah, if her father is intimate with her." Hold on, says the Gemara. It says any one of the forbidden relationships is going to be put to death. Gemara says, must be talking about a case where the person who married this child loved her so much that he said, even if it turns out that you're an islandess, I'm going to keep you as a wife. And in such a case, even if she turns out to be an islandess, we're still going to put the person to death. So again, we do see that we do not have a raya that we're going to go after rov to put someone to death. Tanu Rabbanan. Hamasuleles bibna katan. A woman engages in a very grotesque act of pritzas with her young child. The haraba. As a result of that act, the child had har'ah with her. We explained last time we learned, I think it was on Monday or Tuesday, Sunday or Monday of about 2 weeks ago, the har'ah is machlokes what it is. Either it's the initial contact or is the initial penetration. So it's not a full gemar biyah, doesn't finish off the biyah, but it is the first part of the biyah, which is a problem. So a woman has this intimate relationship with her son, her child. What's the halacha? Beishami omrim, Pasla mina kahuna, she becomes disqualified from kahuna because she's a zona. Besil machshir, and Besil says that she's still going to be kosher for kahuna. Why? Because it's a child. Amar Chia Brei, the Rabbi Bar Nachmeni. Chia, the son of Rabbi Bar Nachmeni, said the following: Amar Chista v'Amri La, Amar Chista Amar Zeiri. It's machlokes exactly how this went. Some say that it was Rav Chia, the son of Rabbi Bar Nachmeni, in the name of Rav Chista, and some say it's Rav Chista who said in the name of Zeiri that Hakomodim, everyone, both Bishamani and Beisil agree that the Ben Tesha, son of Yom Echad, should be also Bia. Everyone agrees that if this child we're talking about in this case was 9 years old in one day, his Bia is a Bia, and yes, it will disqualify his mother as a Zona from Kahuna. Pachos mi ben shmona, if the child was less than 8 years old, and Bia also Bia, everyone agrees that the bia is not a bia. A young child like that cannot actually perform a bia. Where is the machlokes? Ela ben shmona. When we're talking about a child who is 8 years old, Beishamai says gamrina midaros rishonim. We could learn from previous generations. In other words, if we're able to find a biblical reference to the fact that an 8-year-old child had a baby, then we'll say, even though nowadays our science cannot conceive something like that, an 8-year-old child will be able to have a baby, but it happened previously. And since it happened previously, we're going to assume that it is a bia nowadays as well. Beis Hillel says, Lo gamrim b'daros rishonim, we cannot learn from previous generations. The rest of today's Amud is going to take us into some family trees of some history in Tanakh, and we're going to try to figure out whether or not anybody in Tanakh had a child when he was 8 years old. How do we know the previous generations? I was rushing through it, but I have so much time. We have 15 minutes to get through this. This is going to be Gavaldik over here. How do we know the Doros Rishonim had children when they were 8 years old? Minolan de'olid. If you want to suggest midichsiv, because it says in the pasuk, we'll go through a number of these pasukim, and then we'll try to explain outside exactly what everything means to get everything straight. Hello, Zos Bas Sheva. This woman is Bathsheba, Bas Eliam Ashes Uriah Hachiti. So let's just get this clear over here. Number one, you have Bathsheba, who is the daughter of Eliam. Let's get that in our family tree. Bathsheba is the daughter of Eliam. Ashes Uriah Hachiti. Uksiv also says Eliam ben Achitophel. Eliam was the son of Achitophel. So you now have Bathsheba, the son of Eliav, the son of Achitophel, Hagiloni. Uksiv Yishlach biad Nasan Navi, v'yikra Shemo Yedidya. And they sent in the hands of Nasan Navi, and he called him Yedidya, Bavor Hashem, because of Hashem. Now, who is this referring to? That was Shlomo HaMelech. So Shlomo HaMelech was the great-grandson of Achitophel, right? Because Achitophel, Eliam, Bathsheba, and Shlomo HaMelech. Uchsiv, and it says in the pasuk, Vayhilish Nasayin Yamim was at the end of 2 years, Vahayu Gozin Lav Shalom. And they were kind of, I think it means it was chasing after Avshalom. Uchsiv, Avshalom Barach, Avshalom ran away, Vayelech Geshura, Vayisham Shalom, he was there for 3 years. Uchsiv, it says, Vayeshev Avshalom Yerushalayim, Avshalom settled in Yerushalayim, Shnasayim Yamim, for 2 years. Upnei HaMelech Lo Ra, did not see the king. Now it says, in the 40 years, V'yomer Avshalom, El HaMelech, Avshalom said to the Melech, El Chana es Nadar Asher Nadartim. Go to fulfill my neder l'Hashem. B'chever Uchsiv Achitophel Ra Ki Lo Nasa Etzasa. Achitophel, he was the one who's helping conceive the plan, and he realized that his plan was not working. V'yachvosh es Chamar es Chamar. He ultimately saddled up his donkey. V'yakom v'yelech habeis. He went to his house. El Iro v'yetzav al beiso v'yachno. He ultimately committed suicide. Now, getting all this straight, okay, that was the whole story that happened with the rebellion of Shalom. And now what happened is he ended up committing suicide. When was this? Uchsiv, it says, Anshe damimu mirma, the people of blood and mirma of trickery, lo yechetzu yemeim, they're not even going to live half of a life. The typical lifespan of a person, Yimeish, I said about is Shivim Shana. It's 70 years. So a person who's rebellious like this won't live even half of a life. So that means they won't live till 35. V'tanya, we learned, all the years of Doeg, he only lived 34 years. Tofel, the years of Achitophel, were only 33 years. Remember, Achitophel was the great-grandfather of Shlomo HaMelech, and he died when he was 36 years old. So that comes out, all the years were only 33 years. Kama havilahu, how much were they? Plus and plus. So you have 33 years. Dal Sheva, the heavy Shlomo. Shlomo Melech was 7 years at the time of his death. So you have to take away 7 years. Now what are you left with? Pashlu Esrim. You don't even need a calculator. The Gemara does all the calculations for you. Now you take the 33, you're going to minus the 7, then you're up to 26. So you have, in 26 years, all these generations were born. Dal Tarti, you have to subtract another 2 Shni, plus Iburi for the 3 pregnancies, because pregnancies take time. Now, why it's exactly 2 full years? Rashi has his explanation because of the Yimei Tumah and Tyra. Tosfos doesn't go for it. He says it's not exactly 2 years. It's approximately 2 years. Kol chad v'chad. Turns out, Betamni Olid. If you have 26 years minus 2 years, turns out everyone was born, all these generations were born in 24 years. 24 divided by 3 is going to give you 8. It must be that they were fathered when their fathers were 8 years old. Gemara says, hold on, that's not a raya. You can't just take 24 and divide it by 3. Dilma tarvayu b'teisha olid. Maybe 2 of them were born when the fathers were 9, because we know a 9-year-old could actually have a bia. And it could produce a child. Ubasheva, remember there's a female included in this story. Olid Bishis. Basheva, she was a female, she could have given birth when she was only 6 years old. Why? Mishum de'it sabari. Women are more healthy than men. Therefore, a woman can give birth when she's less than 8, less than 9, but a boy has to be 9 years old to be able to give birth. Teda, can bring a raya. Why? The hahavi lavlad meikara. Part of the story is that there was an older child. So if there was an older child, so then it turns out that she for sure had a child before she was 9 years old. So yes, you see that there are women who could give birth much younger than men, and therefore the math is going to be off. And what's the big deal? He was 9 years old, so in other words, all this now makes sense. Okay, Elam Hacha. So where do we have a raya that an 8-year-old can give birth? Eila told us Terach. These are the offsprings of Terach. So you have Terach, Holidus Avram. Terach was Avram's father. Who else's father? He was Nachor's father. And that's Haran. So Terach had, this is a pasuk in the Torah, it tells us Terach had Avram, Nachor, and Haran. Now, Avram gadol mi Nachor shana. Avram was older than Nachor by 1 year. Nachor gadol mi Haran shana. Now, Nachor was a year older than Haran. Nimtza Avram gadol shtei shana mi Haran. Avram must have been 2 years older than Haran. Uksiv v'yikach Avram v'Nachor lehem nashim. Avram and Nachor both got married. Who did Avram marry? Avram married Sarai. We're going to see soon that Sarai and Yitzchak are the same person. Who's Yitzchak? Yitzchak is Haran's daughter. So he married his niece, Yitzchak. V'amar of Yitzchak, Yitzchak zu Sarah. Yitzchak was Sarah. V'lama nikra shema Yitzchak. Why was she referred to as Yitzchak? Shesocha b'ruach HaKodesh. She was able to see with a divine vision. She had ruach HaKodesh. That's why it says, Kol asher tomar elecha Sarah shma b'kola. That's why Hashem told Avram, listen to whatever your wife tells you. Why? Because she's speaking words of prophecy. Davarach, another reason why she was called Yitzchak is Yitzchak shakal sachem b'yofya. Everyone would gaze at her because she was so beautiful. Uksiv. Now, let's get back to our story over here. V'yipal panav v'yitzchak Avram fell on his face and he kind of laughed. Yomer Belibo, he said in his heart, to have a child when I'm 100 years old. Now, Kama Kashish Avram Yisara, how much older was Avram than Sarah? He was Eser Shnin, 10 years. Vikashish Miavua Tartin Shnin, and younger than her father. How much was Haran younger than Avram? It was 2 years. Remember the 2-year difference. The shtakach comes out. Ki oled Haran l'Sara. When did Haran have Sarah? Because again, he was 2 years younger than Avram. And there was a 10-year difference over there. So it turns out he gave birth to Sarah when he was 8 years old. Betamni oled. Gemara says, no, hold on a second. You're making a mistake. You're automatically assuming that Avram was older than Haran. Mimai Dilma Avram Zutadach Bahavi. Maybe he was younger than his brothers. The Torah just puts Avram first because he was much more wise. Derech Chachmasan Kachashav Lahu. Teidan, I'll prove to you that we do that sometimes. Why the Kachashav Lahu Kra Derech Chachmasan, that we sometimes put children not in order of their age, but in order of their wisdom. Noach was 500 years. Vayolad Noach Eshem Eskamas Yafes. At a young age of 500 years, he gave birth to 3 sons, Shem, Cham, and Yafes. Shem Gadol Micham Shana. Shem was older than Cham by 1 year. Cham Gadol Miyafes Shana, and Cham was older than Yafes by 1 year. Nimtzra, what comes out of here is Shem Gadol Miyafes Shtei Shana. It turns out that Shem is 2 years older than Yafes. Hold that in your head for a minute. Uchsev, and it tells us, V'nach ben sheish me'el shana, v'mabel hoya mayim al haaretz. 100 years after he had his children, that's when the Mabel started. Uksev, and it tells us, Ela told us Shem. These are the children of Shem. Shem ben me'ah shana, v'yolad Arpachshad. Shem was 100 years old, and he gave birth to Arpachshad. When was this Shnasayim? Achar Mabel. 2 years after the Babel. Now, how could he have been 100 years old 2 years after the Mabel? It's not possible he could have been 100 years old. Why? Because his younger brother was 100 years old 2 years after the Mabel. This Gemara says, Ben Meir Shana, Par Meir V'Tartan Shnin Havi. He must have been at least 102. Ella must be, you know why Shem was mentioned first? Not because Shem was actually older. Rather, Ella Derech Chachmasan Kachashav Lahu, they were actually listed in order of wisdom. Achanari Derech Chachmasan Kachashav Lahu, could be Avram was just mentioned first because he was smarter, he had more wisdom, but not because he was actually older than Haran. Amar of Kahana, Amris Lishmatik made Rav Zvid, Minarda. I said this in front of Zvid, in front of Rav Zvid from Minarda. And Amar Li Atun Miyachamas Nisu. You learned this concept of putting people in in wisdom order from there. Va'anan Miyachamas Ninula. We learned from someplace else. L'shem Yulad Gamhu Avi Kalbane Aver Achi Yefes Hagadol. He says Shem gave birth. He was the father of everyone on the other side of the river, which is Achi Yefes Hagadol. Yefes Hagalosh B'achim. We see clearly that Yefes was really the oldest, but Shem was still mentioned first. So you see that the names are not in order. Okay, Elaminalas. How do we know that an 8-year-old child can give birth? Mihacha Nuar says from here, Betzalel ben Uri ben Chor lemate Yehuda. Betzalel was the son of Uri, the son of Chor, from the Shevet of Yehuda. Siv, Vatamas Azuva died, who was Kalev's wife. V'yikach lo Kalev es Ephras v'telel lo es Chor. So now we know that Kalev was Chor's father, who was the father of Uri, was the son of Betzalel. So Betzalel, ben Uri, ben Chor, ben Kalev. Turns out that Kalev was the great-grandfather of Betzalel. Now, V'chi Avi Betzalel Mishkan, how old was Betzalel when he built the Mishkan? Bar Kama, how old was he? Again, V'chi Avad Betzalel Mishkan, Bar Kama Havi, how old was he when he built the Mishkan? He must have been Bar Klesar, he must have been at least 13. The Sefer says in the Pasuk, Ish mi melach derashehim osim. The person has to be an ish, an adult, to be able to build a mishkan. V'tani, we learned in a brisa. Shana Rishona Asa Moshe Mishkan. The first year, Moshe built the mishkan. Shnia, the second year after they were in the midbar, he built the mishkan. So again, Shana Rishona, the first year, Asa Moshe Mishkan. Shnia Hekim a Mishkan. He actually put it up. V'shalach Meraglim, he sent the Meraglim during the second year that they were out of Mitzrayim in the Midbar. Uchsiv, and it says in the Pasuk, Ben Arba'im Shana, Anochi B'shalach Moshe Eved Hashem. This is referring to how old Kalev was when he was sent. He was one of the Meraglim. He went as one of the Meraglim. So he was 40 years when he was sent as one of the Meraglim. Now, Va'ata Hine Enochi, today, behold, I am Ben Chamesh Ushmonim Shanam, 85 years old. So now let's do the math. Kama Havilahu, turns out, Arbayim, it was 40 years. Dal Arbay, so you have to subtract 14 years, Davi Betzalel, for Betzalel to be born. Pashlu Esrim Vishis, you're left with 26 years. Dal Tarti Shnid Tlasibur, you have to take out 2 years for all the pregnancies. It turns out, Ashtakat Kochad V'chad B'tamni Olid. It turns out that whole family of Kalev to Betzalel, to Uri, to Kalev, to Chor, Uri, and Betzalel all took place in 24 years. So now we know that there were 8-year-olds that gave birth. That's how we know that 8-year-olds can give birth. Let's just go a little bit further, get up to the Mishnah. Ben Velobas. Ben Sorah Mor is only relevant to a male child, not to a female child. Tanya, Amar Shimon, Bedinu, the truth is, Shetehei Bas Lios Ben Sorah Mora. It would be perfectly appropriate for a female to be a Ben Sorah Mora just like a son. Why Shakal Matsuyin Etzla Bavera? Everyone's going to be readily available for her to do Averas. Again, she's going to be mafkir herself. Right, as Rashi says, Zolala v'sova bekatnusa, if she's going to be doing all these things when she's already a child, sofa kishalot timsa limuda omed parshas drachnu margalas umaraglas harius laver b'shvil esnan. Again, if the whole idea of Ben Sorah Mora is he's nidan al shem sofo, that ultimately this person is going to be a disaster if we keep this person alive. Look at her; she's already acting like this. What's going to happen? She's going to end up being a major stumbling block for all the men in town, but still, Ela Gzeres HaKasavhi, the Pasuk teaches us, Ben Velobas. The concept of Ben Sorah Mora is only relevant to the rebellious or the wayward son, but not relevant to the daughter, even though you might think it should be just as relevant to the daughter, and it makes sense it should be as much relevant to the daughter, the Torah thought otherwise. Have a wonderful rest of your day.